My name is Sadie Ivers. I am 29 years old, and on a rainy Tuesday night last fall, my sister rang my doorbell for the first time in more than 2 years. She stood under the dim yellow hallway light, dripping wet, holding a battered maroon accordion folder against her ribs. The last time we stood that close, I was sliding an identical folder across our parents' kitchen table. The file that destroyed her engagement, exposed a church-wide fraud, and shattered the version of our family I grew up inside. 3 years ago, my sister sat us down and told us she had stage 4 cancer. She was dying, except she was. What she actually did to me, to my parents, and to a congregation that emptied their wallets for her is why my hand was shaking on that doorknob. And what happened when I finally opened that door is a story about how far a person will go to be seen, and what it actually costs to tell the truth. If you've ever been the person who holds a family together while someone else gets all the worry, you know exactly how heavy that quiet is. To understand how my sister faked an illness for over a year, you have to understand the house we grew up in. My mother, Lynn, spent 30 years as an emergency room nurse. She ran our home on triage rules. Whoever is bleeding worst gets seen first. My sister Brooke, 4 years older, figured that out young. She was a weather system of crisis, fevers before field trips, a fainting spell at her own graduation party. The night before my college commencement, she went to the ER with panic-induced chest pains. And my family spent my graduation 200 miles away beside a vending machine, while strangers heard my name read aloud. I became the other product a triage house creates, the easy one, the one who needs nothing. I moved out at 18, paid my own way, and became a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Albany, New York. I check things for a living. I find the missing signature, the date that doesn't line up, the claim that sounds right until you pull the file. When I was 26, I got into my dream Ivy League law school in Manhattan with a half-tuition scholarship. When I announced it at Sunday dinner, my father, Tom, a quiet print shop machinist, hugged me with ink-stained hands and said, "First lawyer in the family." My mother smiled and said, "You always land on your feet, honey." She meant it as praise. It took me a year to hear it for what it actually was, a license. The paperwork you sign when you've decided someone doesn't need catching, so your hands are free for someone who does. Across the table, Brooke was unusually quiet, staring into her water glass like she was trying to keep warm in a heated room. 3 weeks later, she called a family meeting. She sat us down in the living room while her fiancé, Grant, stood behind her chair. Brooke looked around at us, chin up, and announced she had stage 4 lymphoma, 6 months to 2 years. She didn't cry until my mother reached her, and then the two of them folded together on the carpet while my father stood in the middle of the room, turning his reading glasses over and over in his hands. I sat frozen. Even in that first hour, small things snagged on me like a bad affidavit. She named her treatment plan a little too smoothly, no stumbles, no loose threads. Real medical files always have loose threads, but I strangled those thoughts immediately. What kind of monster audits her dying sister? By nightfall, my mother had built a care plan on a legal pad. My name was written into it before anyone asked. Sadie, Wednesdays. Sadie's schedule is flexible. She hasn't started school yet. I tried to help properly. I offered to sit in the waiting room. Brooke said she needed one thing that was just hers. I asked for her oncologist's name so my mother could coordinate records. She promised to text it, but never did. I offered to manage her insurance paperwork. She told me to stop trying to manage her cancer. Every door I knocked on closed with perfect medical manners, so I called my law school admissions office. They granted a one-time, 1-year deferral for a documented family emergency. If I didn't enroll the following fall, my admission and my scholarship were gone forever. I signed the deferral form at my kitchen counter, under the acceptance letter pinned to my fridge by a scales of justice magnet, and postponed my life for a disease I would spend the next year failing to find. Wednesdays became my duty. I'd pick Brooke up at 9, drive her 40 minutes to the medical plaza, and drop her at the main entrance. She was firm about that part. Don't park, don't wait. Infusions take 4 to 5 hours. Her head was shaved. She had done it herself preemptively the week after the announcement. It was the most convincing thing she ever did. You look at a shaved head, and your brain doesn't think to ask for proof. Her church started a fund, raising over $17,000 in under 2 months. Casseroles stacked up in my parents' freezer. My father grew quieter. My mother cut back her hours, and I drove every Wednesday, watching my sister walk through those sliding doors with her chin up. The first real crack appeared in late October. I dropped her off, but instead of driving home, I parked in the visitor lot and went into the lobby cafe for coffee. I lost track of time reading case summaries until my phone buzzed. It was Brooke, done early today, easy session, where are you? When I put my ticket into the parking machine at the gate, it printed the duration, 22 minutes, gate to gate. In the car, Brooke was chatty, narrating her easy session with granular detail. Which nurse, which chair, the exact juice they handed out. I nodded and drove, but those 22 minutes burned in my mind. Easy sessions exist, but that night, I flattened the parking receipt on my counter and slipped it into a brand new folder. 2 weeks later, during what was supposed to be her heavy chemo week, I stopped by her apartment with bone broth. Through the front window, before I knocked, I saw my dying sister at the kitchen island. Her headscarf was off. She was laughing into her phone, eating a takeout container of drunken noodles, extra spicy, the kind she always loved. I stood on the walkway with my warm little container and watched her be completely, radiantly fine. When I knocked, it took her 2 minutes to open the door. The noodles were gone, the scarf was tied back on, and her voice had dropped into the soft, fragile register our family now recognized as brave. "Light day," she murmured. "New anti-nausea meds." I drove home, sat at my counter, and added a line to my folder in neat paralegal print. Date, time, observation. No adjectives. In January, the money moved. My parents had $12,000 in savings, money my father had earned working overtime, which they had promised to me for my first-year rent in Manhattan. My mother mentioned the change casually over the phone while washing dishes. "We're putting it toward Brooke's supplemental care," she said. "There's a healing retreat in Sedona. Her support group swears by it, but insurance won't touch it. You understand, honey, you'll land on your feet." "You always do." I stood in my kitchen, listening to the plates clink, hearing that sentence without the wrapping for the first time. It was an invoice marked paid in advance. I was the daughter whose feet were the family's insurance policy. Brooke was the daughter whose falls they existed to catch. I began examining what was public. The church fund had an update page with photos. One showed Brooke in a recliner, scarf on, thumbs up, an IV line taped to her arm. I put the photo on my laptop screen and zoomed in. The tape held the tubing flat against her bare skin. There was no needle, no catheter, no port. Just clear plastic tubing laid against her arm, going nowhere. On her wrist was a hospital band. Zooming in further, the print was legible enough to read the admission date. It was from 3 years prior, the night of her panic attack on the eve of my college commencement. She had kept the prop, worn it for a photo, and used it to secure $17,000 of other people's money. The next Wednesday, I dropped her at the Medical Plaza entrance, pulled into the visitor lot, and watched the side exit. 25 minutes later, Brooke walked out in sunglasses, scarf off, and stepped into her fiancé's sedan, which had been idling at the curb. They pulled away, laughing. She had built a set, furnished it weekly with fake details, and cast me as the driver. For 13 months, I had been the transportation department for a play. I needed a name to close the case. I got it at Sunday dinner by asking innocently, in my best administrative voice, who my mother should list as the primary oncologist for the retreat paperwork. Brooke answered on autopilot, reaching for her coffee. "Dr. Corwin at the Latham Center." That night, I checked the New York State Physician Licensing Database. I searched every spelling, every specialty, every county, and every bordering state. There was no oncologist named Corwin anywhere in the region. I printed the empty search screen, no results found. The next evening, while Grant was at work, I drove to Brooke's house. I placed a single parking receipt on her kitchen counter. 48 hours, I said. You tell Mom and Dad the truth, or I show them what I have. Brooke looked at the receipt, and for 5 seconds, the performance drained out of her face. I met the real person underneath, dry-eyed, cold, and composed. Sick beats smart in this house, she said evenly. It always has. She didn't use those 48 hours to confess, she used them to reload. At hour 40, a text went out to the family group chat. Brooke has news. Everyone at Mom and Dad's at 7. We assembled in the living room. Grant stood behind her chair. My mother reached for her hand. Brooke looked around at her audience and announced that the cancer had spread to her brain. My mother let out a sound I will never forget. And across the room, Brooke's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no fear in them. It was escalation as armor. A brain lesion made any accusation unspeakable. Who interrogates a woman with tumors in her head? I didn't argue. On Thursday night, I asked my parents and Brooke to sit down at the kitchen table. No Grant, just family at the table where facts lived. I laid out the accordion folder like a prosecutor presenting evidence. 9 parking stamps showing stays of under 40 minutes. The fundraiser photograph showing tubing taped to bare skin over a 3-year-old hospital wristband. And finally, the official printout from the state medical board. No results found. My mother fought it immediately. Parking validators make mistakes. Private centers handle records differently. Database systems lag. She was cross-examining paper because paper could be wrong, and her daughter couldn't be a monster. My father sat with his hands flat over the receipts, staring down, silent. I looked at Brooke. Name one drug, I said quietly. Not the protocol, one pill from your own kitchen, one bottle I can hold. The kitchen went dead silent. My mother turned to Brooke, waiting for the answer that would put me in my place, and my sister slowly began to come apart. First came the anger, screaming that I was jealous, that I had always hated her. Then came the bargaining, claiming the doctor was real but private, that the treatments were holistic. But as each lie died against the physical evidence on the table, she shrank until she was just a 31-year-old woman, shaking in the bright overhead light. Then she uttered the only completely true sentence I had heard from her in over a year. At least when I'm sick, Mom looks at me. I watched those words hit my mother like a physical blow. And then I watched my mother do exactly what I had known she would do. She crossed the kitchen, wrapped her arms around Brooke, and held the daughter who had lied to, defrauded, and manipulated all of us. Over Brooke's shoulder, my mother looked at me, standing by my folder. "What did you do?" she whispered to me. I gathered my papers, squared the edges neatly, and said the words I had carried my whole life. I land on my feet, Mom, because nobody in this family has ever once tried to catch me. I walked out, got into my car, and drove away. The collapse happened fast. That night, Brooke had a real psychiatric crisis. My mother drove her to the ER, and this time the wristband had the correct date. She entered a residential treatment program for 90 days, where a psychiatrist eventually diagnosed her with factitious disorder, driven by severe underlying depression. Grant learned the truth, broke the engagement, and returned the ring by registered mail. My father, showing a quiet strength I didn't know he possessed, met with Pastor Dale and the church leadership. My parents took out a second mortgage on their home to repay every single dollar of the $17,400 raised by the congregation. No criminal charges were filed. The town buried the scandal quietly. And in my family's official history, I became the villain who blew up the family, not the daughter who exposed the fraud. My mother didn't speak to me for weeks. When she finally left a voicemail, her voice was cold. "You destroyed this family in one evening, Sadie. I have to fix it for years." I enrolled in law school on May 30th, 2 days before the absolute deadline, paying the deposit from my phone in a grocery store parking lot. I packed my apartment alone, drove to Manhattan, and threw myself into my studies. I won every technical argument. I had the truth, the seat in school, my scholarship, and my integrity. But being right is a meal that doesn't keep you full. My father called me once a month from the parking lot of the print shop. We talked about my classes and his garden, never mentioning Brooke or my mother. I loved him for those calls, knowing he was making them from the edge of his marriage. 2 years passed. Brooke finished her program, started intense outpatient therapy, and got a job at a plant nursery. She wrote me a letter once, a complete, unvarnished accounting of everything she had taken from me, from my parents, and from the church. At the bottom, she wrote, "Nobody ever looked at me until something was killing me, so I made the something up, and then it almost was." Which brings us back to that rainy Tuesday night last fall. When I opened my apartment door, Brooke was standing in the hall. Her hair had grown back, dark and real. She looked older, tired, but entirely present. Under her arm, she held a soaked maroon folder. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied. She stood straight and delivered her piece without drama. "I'm 2.5 years into treatment. I work at a nursery. I pay Mom and Dad back on the first of every month. Dr. Feld says I'm not fixed, and I've stopped looking for a word that makes it sound easy. I didn't come to ask you to forget, and I didn't come to perform being well." She swallowed hard. "I came because there's a version of the rest of our lives where we are just two strangers who share a mother." Before I let that be the answer, I had to ask, "Do you think we can ever be sisters again?" I had rehearsed a closing argument for 2 years, a speech that would tear through every sacrifice I had made and every lie she had told. But standing there, looking at her holding that wet folder like a child holding a cast, the speech dissolved on my tongue. I realized that for 2 years, I had been living inside my own court case. I had turned my grievance into my identity, just as she had turned her fake illness into hers. Different currency, same starving economy. She bought attention with wounds, I bought worth with martyrdom. "Wait here," I said. I went to my closet, pulled my original accordion folder out of a storage box, and brought it back to the door. I held it out to her. "Trade," I said. She stared at it. "Sadie, you asked if we can ever be sisters again," I said, my voice level and quiet. "The answer is no, not the way we were. The sisters we were died at that kitchen table, and they should have. One of us was performing sick, and the other was performing fine." I looked her in the eye. "Here is what I can offer instead. The first Saturday of every month, there's a coffee shop on my corner. 1 hour, public table. One rule, we tell the truth. Small truths count. Bad truths count double. The first time either of us starts performing, we're done forever. It isn't sisters again. It's sisters from scratch." Brooke began to cry, real, unphotogenic tears. "This is yours to carry now," I said, placing my folder in her hands. "I've had it memorized for 2 years. Truth beats sick, Brooke. It's the only thing that ever has. But someone has to be willing to go first. I'm done being the clerk of your record." She took my folder, and in exchange, she handed me the wet folder she had carried through the rain. We didn't hug. We shook hands, a firm, shaking, real grip. "First Saturday," she said. "First Saturday," I replied. After she left, I sat in my chair and opened the folder she had given me. Inside was an itemized ledger of every repayment she had made to our parents, a certificate of completion from her therapy program, an old photograph of the two of us as children laughing in our grandmother's yard, and 12 $100 money orders marked. "First installment of your $12,000. I sat in the quiet apartment and finally cried, a short, clean release. The prosecution was over. The weight had finally walked down the stairs under the arm of the person it actually belonged to. It has been 6 months of First Saturdays now. The conversations are slow, sometimes difficult, but completely real. Last month, when she texted me canceling due to a migraine, she texted back 5 minutes later. That was a lie. I'm scared of this month's topic. That's the bad truth. I wrote back, a confessed lie counts as a truth. See you tomorrow. My mother and father are still rebuilding, too. My mother recently admitted to me for the first time that deep down, as a nurse, she should have known, but she was too afraid to look. I didn't lecture her. I've stopped billing my family for the past. On my wall, next to my law degree, hangs that little brass scales of justice magnet. It isn't holding up any deferred dreams or courtroom evidence anymore. It just sits there, balanced. I used to think resolution meant getting an apology and forcing everyone to admit you were right. Now I know it's much simpler than that. It's dropping the prosecution, building a new door with one honest rule for a hinge, and keeping the key in your own pocket where it belonged all along.